Hey everyone, it's Alex, and you're listening to the Everyday Stories podcast, a podcast about the everyday stories from the people you know and the people you don't know, here to help you learn a thing or two about life and the stories that define us. Today we're talking to Erica Wirth, a whale connoisseur that has always loved marine animals and began working in the field when she was 14. She graduated from Eckerd College with a bachelor's degree in environmental studies and psychology in 2018 and is now operating out of Monterey, California. She's also a mom to her lovely dog Peaches and happens to be my ex's cousin. on this episode, on this episode, we'll be talking to Erica about your time working on the water and your old podcast that you used to host called Breaching Extinction. So Erica, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Wow.
What an intro.
What an intro. If I asked me to send her an intro, I literally just said whale connoisseur and Peach's mom. And then that was not enough, so we had to add more.
We added a little bit more, a little bit more fluff. But Erica, I wanted to ask you, so I know that you lead or run whale watching tours.
Yeah.
And you drive these massive boats and talk about all the creatures of the ocean. So I wanted to ask you, how did you know that you wanted to pursue this as a career?
So I didn't originally. So when I graduated college, I wanted to, because I studied abroad in Tanzania. I was trying to get back to Africa. I was like, I need to go back. I'm obsessed. I love it. And I would always apply to 10 Africa things and then one whale and dolphin thing. And I would always get the one whale or dolphin thing. And I'd be like, what the fuck? I ended up leaving a job in Arizona, some AmeriCorps nonsense position. And then I went up to visit the San Juan Islands and I fell in love with it up there. I had always wanted to see a whale. I saw a whale. Well, specifically a killer whale. I had seen, my first whale was a beluga whale, but so I went and saw killer whales and then moved up there 2 months later. And it was kind of my goal at that time to just bounce around in the different whale watching areas and just work on whale watching boats for a couple years before going back to school or something. So, my intention was to go into research. It wasn't necessarily to stay doing this, but 2020 happened and I had moved to Monterey for a job, and I now live in Santa Cruz, but I'm still based out of the Monterey Bay. But I fell in love with it, and it's one of those things that you're either a boat person or you're not, and it's once it's in your blood, it's in your blood. And I do not want to work inside. I do not want to look at a computer. I mean, obviously I have to do those things sometimes, but I'm just much more drawn to being on the water all the time. And, I really do love talking to people and educating people, and just all the things that you can see. It's just a really unique profession, and it's just a different way to live, and I can't see myself living in another way. And that is why, and how I knew that I wanted to do this as a career.
And I'm always so curious because, one, I've been to Monterey area, gorgeous. I would never leave. It's so stunning. And I know that any place that has large bodies of water, everyone always wants to go on some sort of whale watching tour. I feel whenever you look up TripAdvisor or things to do in those types of areas, they're always you need to go on a whale watching tour. But I wonder why, why do you think people love whale watching tours?
Because whales are awesome. I mean, whales are just awesome. I feel that's a self-explanatory. They're just objectively the best. But there's just so much variability with whale watching, especially in the Monterey Bay. It's crazy because other people who are not from here know that this is a top whale watching destination, but people that live here, some of them don't even know that there are whales here. I've noticed this particularly when I've been on the dating apps and people ask what I do, and then I explain it and they're I didn't even know we had whales here, which red flag. Ew. You should know.
It's swipe left.
Absolutely not. But here, there's so much variability in the species that you could see and the behaviors that you could see that makes this particular area unique. So I've seen like humpbacks, obviously, sperm whale, beaked whale, orcas, blue whale, fin whale, Rizzo's dolphins, Pacific white-sided dolphins, lags, like you name it. And if it can be seen here, the only thing that I haven't seen here that can be seen here is the Cuvier's beaked whale and the right whale, because there was one time there was a right whale spotted here. I was not on the water that day. And this stupid whale named Frosty, who is a white killer whale who always shows up when I'm not working. Whatever.
You just listed off all these whales. I knew maybe 2 of them. You're like saying all these different things. I was like, yeah, I'm no idea. But you know it all.
I mean, there's over 90 species of cetaceans, meaning whales and dolphins, and 30% of them are underclassified, meaning that they may look really similar, but they're not actually the same species. Which is like my favorite thing about whales, and that's a whole side tangent, and we could have a whole podcast about that alone. But there's a lot of whales out there, a lot.
And what do you love about the ocean and the animals that live in it? Like when you saw your first whale, what made you just go like, oh my God, like almost have like an aha moment, like this is so cool, I want to do this?
Okay, so that's a interesting one about so my aha moment and when I saw my first whale were like within a couple days of each other. So when I was like 16, I got a scholarship from the Columbus Zoo because I was volunteering there and working there to go study polar bears. And I went up there and I learned about, or up there meaning Churchill, Manitoba, Canada, which is the polar bear capital of the world. And before we had seen any polar bears, it was my dream to see a whale. I'm looking out, like we're at some state park, I can't remember the name of it, and I see all these like little white, like little things, and I'm like, what is that? Like to the ranger, and he goes, oh, those are belugas. And I like start crying because I'd always wanted to see a whale, and I was like, are you fucking kidding me? And belugas are like the cutest, like derpiest of all the whales. And I was like, so I like lost my mind. I was like, oh my God. And then when we went into the wild to look for polar bears, we had a polar bear come up to our tundra buggy and like stretch her arms up, and she was looking up at us, and I was like 4 feet from a wild polar bear. And it was like that moment that I was like, yup, there's nothing else I can do with my life. This is what we're doing, something related to wildlife. But I've tried to work with other forms of wildlife, and I always get pulled back to the ocean. I always get pulled back to whales, and like, I don't know, there's just like this draw to the ocean, and I feel very uncomfortable being landlocked for long periods of time. Like, it's okay for like visiting, but it's not okay for like the long term, you know?
So you have this like inherent need to like be on the water.
Yeah. And especially now that I work on boats.
That's so wild because I feel like it's just a mosh posh. Like 50% of people would love that, but I also feel like other 50% just get like so seasick and they're like, yeah, I don't want to be on the water. The ocean is scary. We don't know what's fully in it.
Yeah.
And there's like so much fear around it, but I like how you kind of see the beauty in it and you're like so drawn to it that you want to go towards it or like be in it.
Yeah, I think there's nothing to be scared of as long as you have a healthy respect for it. Like, as long as you know that it is more powerful than you and you don't do stupid things, it's not a scary place. It's scary when you don't pay attention and when you don't have respect for it. And I think everyone, I would love for everyone to love the ocean and not be scared of the ocean. And in order to do that, you need to like learn about it. And like, I think like one of the first things is like, know that sharks are not as dangerous as everyone makes them out to be. Everyone's always scared of sharks. It's really not that serious. But also it's like, you know, pay attention to weather conditions and like don't go out into the water or don't go near wildlife that it's not safe to go to. Like, you know, if there's bad weather, like big swells, lots of wind, that's not a good time to be on the water. But yeah, I don't think it can be scary if you are not respectful of what's going on, if that makes sense.
Yes. And have you had any life or death experiences while working on the water?
I've had, I would say Thankfully, no. I had one time where, fortunately, I've only had one time. I'm sure that it will happen again in my lifetime because it happens to all captains. But I had one time where I was legitimately questioning how, like, how how was I going to get these people into safety, and questioning just all of my plans. So long story short, I was driving a little Zodiac style boat, which is basically those little inflatable expedition boats that has like a tiller. It's not like you don't have a helm where you're steering from it. It's like a little dinghy. So I've got people in this boat, and we've had a glacier that has just calved. This is my second time driving in ice ever. This glacier has calved, and it was a beautiful calving, like amazing, gorgeous. We love it. But then,
What is a calving?
so when have you seen like videos of when big chunks of ice will fall off of glaciers?
Yes.
That's a glacier calving.
Okay.
So it calved, giant piece of ice, enough to like cause waves. So like the boats are moving in waves. And, we're kind of perusing, we're doing our thing, and like all of a sudden, a little bit after that, all of this ice has broken up underneath the surface, and it's like coming in fast, and it's coming at us, and it's like all these little chunks of ice. And when you're driving in ice, you want to like avoid the really big pieces. Like obviously, like your boat can push the little pieces out of the way, but like what they say about icebergs is like 10% on top, 90% on bottom. You don't know what's on bottom. Like you want to avoid the bigger pieces. And if there are areas that are too densely packed with ice, you don't want to go in that. So all of a sudden, we're like as close to the glacier as we're going to get, and all of this ice starts like coming in fast. And I'm like, okay, I need to turn around. So I start turning around. But then there were two other little Zodiac boats with us, and like obviously we're not going to leave the other boats behind. Like that's not the vibe. So I'm like waiting for these people, but in the back of my head I'm like, if I could just go now, I could get out of this, but we can't leave these people behind. So basically, like, I'm looking ahead of me. I'm looking for where like the big ship is, cuz this is off of a cruise ship. And like it's really far away, and between me and this boat, which for a while I couldn't see it because it was far away. Not so far away that like anything was crazy, but like I mean, it felt crazy in my head a little bit. But there was just so much ice, like densely packed in, and we did eventually get out. But it was one of those things where it was like, because like when you're a captain, you should be trained to, in a sense, go worst case scenario. Like your brain should be, you should be wired for safety. Like I believe that all captains should be wired to think that everyone's going to die and that you're going to go to jail, which sounds really dramatic, but I mean, if something happens, you're going to jail. Like yeah, I mean, you should be. But basically, like, in my head, I'm like, okay, what do I do? Like, in my head, I'm just like, okay, if I can't get out of this ice, what do I do? Do I take these people to the side, like, and have them climb up on, like, on the rocks? Like, what do we do? But eventually, it took a million years. I had, like, luckily there was another crew member in there with me, and they're, like, pushing ice out of the way with a paddle and, like, helping me push ice out of my prop. And it took us, like, an extra hour to get out of there, but we eventually got out of there. We eventually got back on the ship. Like, it was never really that dangerous, but it was in those initial moments of looking around, of being like, what do I do? And also it was like my second time ever driving in ice, and I'm like, what do I do? But obviously on boats there's always safety equipment. Like, we're in we have radios, we have cell phones, like we're within reach of like help. But yeah, that was like the only time that I've ever been like legitimately scared on a boat and been like, what do I do?
Well, I'm glad that everyone was safe and you were able to get to safety, but hopefully that never has to happen ever again.
Yeah, hopefully it never has to happen again. I agree.
Yeah, for anyone. Mm-hmm. But in terms of not just scary life-death experiences, but what is the coolest thing that you've seen in the ocean?
That's so hard to answer because I've seen a million cool things in the ocean. I would say my favorite thing to watch is when the killer whales hunt the gray whales. And I've seen that
Oh.
twice. It's a rare thing to see. One time I did see them successfully um, kill a baby gray whale, and that mom put up a fight. That was crazy. And then another time, I was the one that found them. It was like 30 killer whales trying to take down two adult gray whales, and they were not successful. Um, but it's really fun to watch. And then we call them like humpback muggings, or like friendly humpbacks, when the humpbacks like come up to the boat and like say hi. Basically, I mean, obviously I don't know if it's saying hi, it's an animal, but like where they get really close and express interest in the boat, that's one of my favorite things to see too.
Wait, how do the killer whales hunt? Do they circle the gray whales? Like how does that even
Yeah, so
what's the choreography?
what was the choreography? So the interesting thing about killer whales, which I'm gonna just do a side tangent for like a minute about killer whales, is that they're not all the same. They're all very different. There's what are called different ecotypes, and there's currently 10 recognized by scientists, but there's honestly probably more. But basically, it means they eat different foods. They have different dialects essentially, and they have different behaviors and geographic ranges. So the ones that we were watching are what we call transient or Biggs killer whales that are marine mammal eaters. And basically, killer whales, no matter what type of killer whale, they seem to like to play with their food. And so basically, what they do is they're going to hunt in groups. Killer whales are matriarchal, so whoever the matriarch is kind of the boss and is going to be orchestrating for, that's kind of, there's a little pun in there, orchestrating, how the whales come in and do stuff. But basically, what they do is, like, especially when they have young ones, they're going to want to show the young ones how to hunt. And so they're going to want to give the young ones, like, a little bit of practice. But essentially, what happens with the gray whales is they want to just jump on top of them and kind of, like, try to drown them. Because the gray whales are bigger than the killer whales, but if you jump on them enough and, like, get them to stop breathing, you have a chance. But there was definitely some, like, biting of the pectoral fins, which are like the little arm fins. There's a lot of really good footage on Monterey Bay Whale Watch's probably YouTube page of that. I would imagine it's up on their YouTube page, but like that particular day with the two adult gray whales, they have a videographer that got a lot of really good footage that day, so people can go
Oh my
watch it if they
gosh.
want to.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Have you, I know, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but have you worked on those National Geographic boat tours?
Yes.
I would love to hear about your experience on them. Like, if I'm gonna go on one, what should I expect?
Um, they're so much fun. I always tell people not to have any expectations. It really is going to depend on what trip you're on because they go everywhere. I have done most of my work in, like, between the Channel Islands and Alaska. And the expectations for the trips are different. But I spend the bulk of my time in Alaska. And I would say the one thing you can certainly expect is to be cold, for sure. Bring layers. Alaska is one of the most beautiful places in the world. I think everyone should go there if they have a chance. It's incredibly pristine and everything is so big and like, it's basically just like the Pacific Northwest on steroids. But I think that if you're going on one of those trips, you should just expect to have, honestly, the best, most fun time of your life. It depends on where you're going, but basically, you go on Zodiac cruises, you go on hikes. Depending on the location, you could go snorkeling, you could do a polar plunge, like where you jump into like glacier water sort of thing,
Oh my gosh.
which I've done, and it's very cold. Um, but yeah, I mean, you're gonna learn a lot. All the expedition staff on there, like I always have a good time. I've never had a bad time. Like I learn so much from my coworkers when I'm there. There's opportunities for presentations like every day. That like you're gonna learn something every day. You're gonna get to see new things. It's a very different, like, cause like I feel like when I tell people that I work on cruise ships, they're like, ew, which I get that because
Yeah.
drunk people, gambling people, thousands of people on a boat. That does sound awful, but that's not what I'm doing. On the Nat Geo ships, it's like, at least the US ships, it's like 60 to 100 people depending on what boat you're on. So it's a much more intimate experience. You get to know the people on the boat very well. You get to like interact with the expedition staff a lot. And you're going and you're getting, it gets you to places that you couldn't otherwise get to. Like, we go a lot of places that the bigger ships can't get into. Like, one of my entirely like favorite places on the planet is called Misty Fjords National Monument, and like, I've never seen a big cruise ship back there. I don't think they can get back there. I think most people haven't even heard of this place, and it's like one of my favorite places in the world.
Where is it?
It's in Southeast Alaska.
I want to go on one at some point in my life.
Honestly, you should, dude. Come with me.
I went on one cruise ship. It was like a Carnival cruise when I was like 14,
Sure.
and I did not have that much fun. But I feel like a Nat Geo cruise is way different from the way
It's
they
a
were explaining
completely
it.
different vibe. It's for the best way that I would describe the customers and the type of traveler is it's an intentional traveler. It's people that like they're going because they want to experience something different. They care about nature. They're curious. That's like pretty much the demographic.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I gotta sign up for the next one. I gotta go to Alaska,
Yeah, you should come with me.
clearly.
Yeah.
I would be down. I wanted to segue into the podcast
Okay.
that you used to have called Breaching Extinction, where you talked about what was impacting the decline of endangered killer whales. I wanted to first ask you, why did you start the podcast in the first place?
Yeah, so I was living in the San Juan Islands, and I was learning about the southern resident killer whales. So not all killer whales are residents, like the ones we were talking about earlier that eat the gray whales. Those are not residents, those are transients. And not all resident killer whales are southern residents. So basically, I was learning about these whales, which there's, give or take, somewhere between, like, and I'm just going to give a range because of whenever people are listening to this podcast, it's probably going to be a different number, but 70 to 75 individuals at a given time. So a very small population. And so basically I started this podcast because I was learning about them. I wanted to uncover like more of what was going on, and I thought that other people would be curious too. And my thought was like, okay, I'll just do like a 12 episode series where I like kind of try to angle it from like an interdisciplinary lens of like looking at it from like a scientific standpoint, a social standpoint, economic, like cultural, and like very quickly found out that this topic could not be covered in 12 episodes. Like it's incredibly complex. There's a really big history around it. There's a lot of culture around it, around the southern residents in particular. And so I ended up doing that podcast for 4 years. And I would say for the first 2.5 years, it was like on average about once a week with like some breaks in between of interviewing someone that was somehow related to the southern resident killer whales. And then the last like year and a half, it was just more general, like science focused. So it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed doing it. I'm sure, as you have noticed, a podcast is a lot of work. Well, maybe not with your
Yeah.
little website that you have that were,
On Riverside?
yeah.
We love Riverside.
But it was a lot of work, and also like the people in my industry are like a lot of our work is dependent on weather and dependent on whales. And so at the time when I was doing this recording, I only had like 1 day off a week, and I would schedule things, and I was living up on a mountain, and like I would have people, like I'd be waiting for like a Zoom call at like 12, and then I'd have people cancel at like 11:45, and like I've now wasted my whole day off living up on this mountain because it's like I have to plan to leave. So it ultimately just became too much for me to fit into my life, but I really enjoyed doing it, and I made a lot of really amazing connections and like friendships that have like carried on way outside of the podcast. Like one of my best friends, you'll appreciate this. Her name is Erica, and she's also a captain, and she's
Oh my
also
gosh.
bisexual, and she's also obsessed with her dog. And we are going to see Beyonce in April.
So you're twins?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
What the heck?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so we met through the podcast, and we're like best friends, and she's the best.
Oh, I wanted to ask about that. What was the community reaction around the podcast? Since you had it for like 4 years.
It was mixed. The whale industry it's a weird place to exist in. A lot of times I do feel like I'm in a secret club, because there are certain whale destinations, and like I will go to whale destinations and I will just run into people that I know, either from the podcast, from working in the whale world. Like it literally doesn't matter where I go, I'm gonna run into someone. Like it just,
That's so wild.
which is like, how crazy is that to like live in California and then be in Juneau and just run into someone on the street who I know from the whale community, you know? Yeah.
The world is small. The world
It's
is
small.
so much smaller and more connected than we think.
It is so small and so connected. But basically, the reaction was mixed. I had a lot of people that really liked it, but because that I was talking about a highly political group of whales, there were not always great reactions, great responses, because I'm very opinionated and I am science-based in a lot of my opinions, but my opinions will change based on new science. And like, you know, obviously I work in the whale watching industry, but with that being said, like, you know, in ecotourism, we do walk a fine line between showing people wildlife and exploiting wildlife. And I still do believe that population has been exploited by the ecotourism industry. And like, the people in the industry that work with that group of whales, this is a big part of why I left the San Juan Islands, is because I didn't feel comfortable watching those whales, at least not from a boat, because watching transients from a boat versus residents from a boat is different, because the transients don't echolocate when they hunt, because they're hunting marine mammals and the marine mammals can hear that echolocation. The residents, they are going to use echolocation to hunt their salmon. The salmon's endangered, these whales are sick, and the boats essentially are making noise. So the boats are not the biggest problem. The boats alone are not killing the whales. However, I think that with a population that's so small, anything that's impacting them that we can do to help not impact them, we should be doing that. So I did get some positive responses. I did like meet some really cool people out of it. I also had some really nasty negative responses. Like, I feel like I've, in a way, been blacklisted from the whale watching community in the San Juan Islands by some people. Like, there are definitely certain companies that I could never apply to work for because of, like, me speaking up about my feelings. I mean, maybe that's changed now because it's been years, but I had a girl write a song about me on Facebook. Like, I didn't respond to her messages, and she's like a member of like someone higher up in the Pacific Whale Watching Association, and she's a bit older than me, and this was like a couple years ago, so I was like, this is really immature for like some woman in her 30s to be writing a song about someone. Like, she was
like negatively about
like
you,
mocking me on her Facebook page. And yeah, and she had messaged me, but because that I didn't respond like immediately, which I think I responded in like 24 hours, she took it upon herself to like go write a song about me and like blacklist me. Like, I feel like, and I've been blocked from like various Facebook groups that she's like an admin of because of like
oh my
my
gosh,
opinions. And that's why I'm like, yeah, like it's like and that was also too a part of why I stopped doing it, not because of this particular woman, but because that like existing on the internet is a weird thing sometimes. Like, there's just a lot of like opinions and nonsense, and I feel like it just opened me up to like a lot of bullshit, frankly, that I'm not super interested in. And I'm not somebody that wants to be in the spotlight, which is why I was on a podcast behind a microphone and it wasn't like my face everywhere. But even like, and the podcast did gain a bit of traction there for a while, and then it was just like, I don't know, like, it's just like you have people There were a lot of really positive things. I did have definitely, I would say, way more positive than negative, but at the same time, it ended up being a lot more work than what I was like ended up being able to
Mm.
sustain. And also, like, it made me feel like a little too vulnerable and a little too exposed to the whale community, because people in the whale community love them, no shade, but a lot of whale people they can only think about whales. Like, if you do anything outside of whale watching, like, they don't understand. They're like, what? Like, only whales
Oh.
exist. I can only travel to a whale place. Like, if I say, like, for example, if I were to tell people that I'm going to LA to see Beyonce, they would be like, "Well, are you gonna go whale watching while you're there? Are you gonna like go down to Newport?" Like, I mean, probably, but like it's not why I'm going. So yeah, it's just a whale people. It's an interesting group. It's an interesting group of people. I love a lot of
And
them, but like for me, there's a lot more to life than whales. Whales are a big part of my life, absolutely. But there's a lot more to life than just whales, and that was also part of me stepping back from the podcast. Was I was like, okay, I'm working 6 days a week doing whale or otter or seal things, and then like in my on my day off, I'm doing more whale stuff, and it's like I love whales. I want them to continue to be a big part of my life, but they're not the whole thing.
got it. And would you ever bring the podcast back?
It's possible. I mean, if I had the time and the resources and the support, I do have a good friend that her and I have talked about potentially bringing it back. If I had the time and the resources, it's a possibility. I would just have to take a different approach to it. I think of like maybe doing every other week or something like that, because I really like I feel like I was my best because I'm a naturalist at heart. I am a captain, but I was a naturalist first, which is basically just like an educator. And I feel like I was my best version of being a naturalist when doing the podcast, because I was talking to scientists directly who were doing the work when the work was coming out. So it's like I'm talking to everyone about the most relevant science all the time. Um, so it's a possibility. It's not, I don't foresee it happening anytime soon, but it's definitely like not out of the question, because I really did enjoy it and I did get a lot of fulfillment from it, but it's a lot of work. And when you're, living in one of the most expensive zip codes in the country, working 6 days a week, adding more work for free is not always a good time.
So true.
Yeah.
Well, if it ends up coming back, we'll all be tuning in.
Thank you. Thank you.
I also have a couple of rapid fire questions.
Okay.
The first is, what's your favorite ocean animal and why?
Can I do top three? That's really hard.
Top three, top three.
Okay. Humpback whales, because they're just objectively the best. If any animal's gonna get close to the boat and do a cool thing, it's gonna be a humpback. Killer whales, just because they're badass, they're matriarchal. I love watching them kill shit. It's awesome. Nudibranchs, because I think that's an obvious answer. They're beautiful. They're silly. Do you know what a nudibranch is?
No idea.
Okay.
I'm gonna look it up
Not
after
a
this.
lot of people do. It's spelled Nudibranch. Nudibranch. And there's like a gazillion of them. And they're these tiny little sea slugs that they can get big. Peaches, actually, I'll send you a picture. Peaches saw her first nudibranch the other day. Um, I think it was like a lemon one. I can't remember exactly. But they're all colorful and goofy. And it's just like this magical ocean slug that's amazing. So those are my top three.
Amazing.
Okay.
And if you could be any animal in another life, land or water, what would it be?
I feel like a nudibranch. Yeah.
You'd
Because
be a nudibranch.
because they're just like vibing in the tide pools. Like, I don't want to have to like kill a bunch of stuff. Like, in theory, in theory, I'd want to be a humpback whale, but like, I don't want to eat anchovies and krill. Like, that sounds gross. Um, but I feel like just vibing in the tide pools and like just hanging out and being like cute and goofy.
I love that. That's so like California of you to say.
Thank you.
Just want to hang out in the tide pools.
Yeah.
And then when truly is the best time to go on a whale watching tour?
I mean, I would say in Monterey Bay, peak time is March to October. October's a really good month because the seas tend to be really calm. The humpbacks are about to leave and they tend to be a little more active.
And knowing what you know about the ocean and the creatures that live in it, do you think mermaids are real?
Um, I think anything's possible. I think anything's possible. They might be like super deep down there and we just don't see them. Cause like, what is it? Like 75% of the ocean's like undiscovered. It's
Yeah.
possible. And like sailors thought that manatees were mermaids for a long time. Who's to say that
Oh,
manatees
I didn't know
aren't
that.
mermaids? I think that they're equally as beautiful.
I agree.
Yeah.
And do you have any mammal fun facts? Just, it could be anything, super random.
Super random. I mean, I feel like my favorite marine mammal like fact is like that whales have culture just like people. So we kind of touched on it a little bit with there being different types of killer whales, but like they have their own dialects, and even like specific pods have their own little like calls and whistles that are like unique to them, which is similar to what we call like a familect, like certain words that you use with your like just your family or your friends. They have that. So I would say that's my favorite. Because it's bisexual health month, I also am going to give you a gay whale fact. Well, dolphin
Nice.
fact. So, female dolphins, their clit is right at the entrance of their vagina. So the females will use their rostrum, which is their nose, and they'll like shove it into the other female. So dolphins are lesbians. That's
Well, what do the guy dolphins do then?
they're the boy dolphins are like they'll definitely like mate with just about anything. So I guess like dolphins are bisexual. I mean,
Oh, I
obviously
love that.
they're doing whatever, but dolphins are like dolphins are gay. A lot of animals are gay, but
Amazing.
dolphins are like particularly gay.
Oh my God, I love that. That's the best fun fact.
Yeah.
That was perfect way to end it
Good.
too.
I'm glad.
Um, and I like to end every single episode based off of my love for Criminal Minds, which if you ever watched it, they always start and end every episode with a quote.
Okay.
So I picked a quote for you,
Okay.
and also based off of this episode. And the quote is, "You will love the ocean. It makes you feel small, but not in a bad way. Small because you realize you're part of something bigger." And that's from Lauren Miracle.
Cute. I
I'm
like
not
that.
sure who
I
she
and
is,
maybe
but
that is why I like the ocean.
because you're part of something bigger,
Exactly. Yes.
the earth. Well, Erica, thank you so much
Yeah.
for joining
Of
the
course.
podcast. And I honestly feel like, and I hope everyone else that was listening to this learned so much about whales and the ocean and whale watching tours and everything like that. It was very informative. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course, anytime.
Sweet.